Question. You mention being balanced a lot, and I'm wondering what exactly you mean. To some it means being visibly acceptable to the mass consciousness and what any traditional parent would expect of their child in terms of appearances, attitudes, normal behavior, lifestyle, etc. Or in other words, not seeming crazy or too different. Is this what you mean? If so, is this what it means to be aligned with our I Am presence and fulfill our divine plan? Okay, so I can see why that could be confusing, what I'm talking about. So it's good to define it a little more closely. What does it mean to be balanced? Well, first of all, on the spiritual path, it doesn't mean being acceptable to the mass consciousness and your parents' expectations, because none of us who are spiritual people are acceptable to our parents' expectations and what's normal in our society, because we didn't grow up in societies where being spiritual is normal. You are either religious in the mainstream religion in your society, or you're a scientific materialist. So being spiritual, it's not normal. But what I'm talking about when I mean balanced is that we are balanced in our approach to the spiritual path. So it's more a state of mind than an outer behavior. And what I've seen both in myself and in many, many other people is that when we first find the spiritual path, we go into an unbalanced state of mind. And the reason for this is actually quite simple. Most of us grew up without having any awareness of the spiritual path. Both traditional religion denies and materialism deny that there's a spiritual path. So then at a certain age, in my case I was 18, you find that there's a whole spiritual side to life. There's spiritual movements, spiritual teachings that have been talking about all the questions that they couldn't answer in traditional religion or materialism. So all of a sudden you are really, really excited. It's like your whole worldview changes. It's like whole new worlds open up. And there's so many things to explore, especially today with the internet. When I grew up, there wasn't internet, but there was still many things to explore as a spiritual person. And so many people go into what I call the exploratory phase, where you are really just exploring what's out there. You're reading this, you're reading that, and there's all kinds of interesting things. And it causes many people to go into a state of imbalance. I've talked about it in some videos say that in order to find the spiritual path, you have to be open-minded. But many people, when you go into this exploratory phase, you become too open-minded because you're open to too many different things, and you end up being confused. So you simply scatter yourself, you scatter your mind, you spread yourself too thin. And what happens to most people is that after some time doing this, they find what I would call a more balanced approach, where they focus on one or maybe a few spiritual teachings. And I say, okay, this is what I'm going to focus on. So then they study this and they find some kind of spiritual practice and they start applying this. Instead of, trying too many different things at once, you focus on a few things. And that's usually when people go into a period of more stable growth. And I would call that balanced. You're not going this direction this week and another direction that week and a third direction. You see what I'm saying? You're focusing on something and you actually attain a bit more growth that way. And so this is one way to explain being balanced. But the other thing I mean with being balanced is that you gradually get a feel, an intuitive feeling for what works and what doesn't work on the spiritual path. Again, you can see there's so many claims out there of do this, come to this course, become enlightened in one weekend, whatever you have. So you have these very, what would you call it, exaggerated claims of instant benefits or automatic benefits. And after having tried a few of those, I think most people realize that this is just, it's not credible. It's not constructive. It doesn't give you results. So people become more balanced in saying, okay, let's take a long-term approach to spiritual growth. So this can be another way to explain balance. You think it can happen in 5 minutes, or you take a more long-term approach and realize it's probably going to take some time, it's probably going to take some work and some application of a spiritual technique. But the other thing is that you gradually, well, let me step back a little bit. When we first find the spiritual path, why do we find a spiritual teaching? Why do we recognize there's something here that's beyond what we were brought up to believe, but it's valuable? Well, it's because we have what I would like to call discernment. A discernment, an intuitive discernment. There's something here that's valuable, right? And really what you could say is that the spiritual path is a process of increasing that discernment. But what is discernment? Well, I have talked about in many of my videos that we have two basic states of consciousness. We can see ourselves as separate beings going into the state of mind that are called duality and separation, or we can see ourselves as connected beings. And basically when we find the spiritual path, it's because we shift and begin to see ourselves as connected beings. And really the spiritual path could be said to be a process where we increase our connection. We become more and more connected. So the question is, of course, to what? What are we being connected to? And as I explained in many of my videos, we have a higher self, a spiritual self. I call it the I Am Presence. And essentially that's what we are being connected to. But we can also connect to something besides the higher self, which is in the spiritual realm, where there are spiritual beings that serve us as our guides and teachers. I call them the Ascended Masters. And they are an expression of what they give to us is this ability to discern based on what we can call the one mind or the Christ mind or the Buddha nature. So in other words, when we are in separation, we are in duality. We are using the duality consciousness to define this is right, this is wrong, this is true, this is false. But the duality is always separated, right? It's what the duality consciousness defines as true isn't true. It's just a relative truth, relative to some relative lie. But the one mind is an absolute or non-dual reality. And this is what we connect more and more to as we walk the path, as we raise our consciousness. And as we increase our connection, we become more balanced. Because we begin to see through the dualistic polarities, the dualistic claims, the dualistic extremes. And that means that we become less and less pulled into taking these extreme viewpoints. Like, you have, like, yeah, the political field, the political minefield, right? I know people who have been spiritual students for decades and who I would say were reasonably balanced. But then came Trump, his first presidency, then came the corona crisis, vaccinations, masks, and this and that. And suddenly they lost balance. And what I mean with that is, it's not a matter of the viewpoints. But what I mean with that is that they became very attached to a specific viewpoint being right. And they became obsessive compulsive about convincing other people that they were right. And it's simply a shift in their whole approach, their whole, you can almost say, vibration, their energy, where they became this very obsessive compulsive energy, and this is not balanced, right? It doesn't matter. I'm not talking about viewpoints. It doesn't matter whether you agree with this or agree with that, because you can be for Trump or against Trump, you can be for vaccines or against vaccines, and you're unbalanced either way. It's simply a matter of, are you balanced or are you obsessive compulsive? Because when you're balanced, you're not thinking in black and white terms, right and wrong, this or that. You look for a bigger perspective. When you're connected, you're always seeking to increase your connection. And therefore, you begin to evaluate, if I'm pulled into taking these very strong black and white viewpoints, I lose connection, and I don't want that. So I want to stay balanced. And really, as you increase your connection, you have an experience of this Christ mind, the one mind. And you experience that it's beyond anything here on earth. It's beyond, especially beyond ideas and opinions and viewpoints. And especially beyond anything that comes from duality. You come to a point where you can sense. I mean, it's like, let's say you are in a dark cave. And there's a little bit of light. You can see there's some things there, some shadows, some little lighter areas, but you can't really see clearly. And you are thinking, you are grabbing a hold of something and say, oh, this is the truth. This is what I can hold on to. This is my firm foundation. But you have no frame of reference from outside the dark room. But now you increase your connection, which is like saying, all of a sudden, you have a fiber optic cable that goes outside the dark cave, and you could see there's light outside the cave, right? So you have a frame of reference. It's not a matter of what's right and wrong, black and white in the darkness. You can see there's light and there's shadows. And in the darkness, everything is just shadows. So whenever you look through that cable at the light, you are realizing, oh, this is not the light. Whatever it is in the darkness, it doesn't matter whether it's this viewpoint or that viewpoint, it's still in the darkness. And you actually learn to read the vibrational difference, the difference between the light and duality, the difference between the one mind and the dualistic mind, the divided mind, the separate mind. You can instantly read it. I mean, you can come to a point where you can read a certain idea and you're saying, yeah, well, from an intellectual viewpoint, you can't really say there's anything wrong with it, but you just sense the vibration is off because it's dualistic. It's coming from this dualistic state of mind where it's arguing for a particular viewpoint as if this has to be the ultimate truth. And, so what I'm trying to say here is that there are different levels of being balanced. And as you rise on the spiritual path, as you raise your sense of connection or your connectedness, you attain higher and higher degrees of balance. And you can come to a point where nothing pulls you into the extremes, into the dualistic extremes. It's like Jesus said, the prince of this world cometh and has nothing in me. The prince of this world is in essence the duality consciousness and people who are trapped in duality. And they're always trying to pull you in to support their arguments. See, we're right. See, we're right. Here's why we're right. You should support us. And you come to a point where you just read the vibration of that and you say, no, not for me. And it's also the Buddha who was sitting under the Bo tree and the demons of Mara were parading before him, trying to pull him into reacting somehow. But he had no attachments. So you could say in the Buddhic language, an attachment is something that pulls you into reacting to the world. And only when you have no attachments can you be free of reacting. And so this is another way to define balance. You have no attachments. You can look at life on earth neutrally, and you are not pulled by one of these subconscious selves that I always talk about into taking a certain viewpoint that is unbalanced because it's in duality. See, in duality, everything is unbalanced. Okay? I know this is a little tricky because you can say, here's black, here's white. When you start blending, you reach a midpoint where there's gray. And so it would seem that gray is balanced. But it isn't, because it's still out of duality. So I actually have some ego discourses where I talk about black and white thinking and gray thinking. But they are both dualistic. And this is what you start transcending when you find balance. So, as the question is talking about, not seeming crazy or too different. What is craziness? I mean, many societies have behavior that they consider normal, but if you look back at history, I think back at the 1500s in Europe, men were always carrying a sword, and if they perceived that another man had offended them, they would challenge him to a duel where one of them would get killed. That was normal behavior at the time. I would consider that crazy. So I'm just saying, you can look at any society, and it's not about being normal in that society. So it's a matter of finding a way to be balanced, but not normal. But of course, you can also look at spiritual people and say many spiritual people are doing things that are crazy because they're too extreme. So as I said, in the exploratory phase, many times we have to try different things out. And they are too extreme. I mean, I did some things in my first years on the spiritual path that were clearly unbalanced and clearly extreme. And that was, I'm not trying to blame myself or blame other people for it. Sometimes we just have to experiment to find out, oh, that was too far to that side, oh, that was too far to that side. And then you find something, it's not a compromise between the two. See, this is the thing. The Buddha talked about the pairs, and then he talked about the middle way. But the middle way is not the midpoint between the two extremes. The middle way is transcending the whole scale of the extremes, both the one extreme and the other, and the midpoint. You're transcending the scale. The scales are falling from your eyes. That's what, so you could basically say balance is overcoming the dualistic mind, the dualistic illusions, by connecting to the one mind, the undivided mind.